Walk into any gym, and you'll hear the same advice shouted from two completely different camps. One side swears you have to grind every single set to complete failure, or you're just wasting your time. The other side insists failure is dangerous, unnecessary, and you should always leave a few reps in the tank. Here's the thing, both camps are partly right, and both are mostly missing the actual point. So let's cut through the noise. Training to failure can absolutely build muscle, but it is not required to build muscle, and using it the wrong way can actually work against you. In this video, we're breaking down what training to failure really means, what the research actually shows, when it helps, when it backfires, and exactly how close to failure you need to get for real results. First, let's get precise about what failure even means, because the word gets thrown around loosely. Technical failure is the point where you can no longer complete a rep with good form, even though you might physically be able to grind out one more ugly, broken form rep. After that, absolute failure is the point where the muscle genuinely cannot produce another rep, no matter what your form looks like. When serious lifters and researchers talk about training to failure, they usually mean technical failure, because pushing past that mostly just adds risk and sloppy mechanics rather than useful stimulus. There's also a concept you need to know, called reps in reserve, usually shortened to reviser. It describes how many more reps you could have done before hitting failure. A set taken to 2 reps in reserve means you stopped with roughly 2 good reps still left in the tank. This is the tool researchers and coaches actually use to talk about training intensity, because it captures the whole spectrum between barely working and true failure, instead of treating it like an on-off switch. Now the big question, does training to failure actually build more muscle? Here's where honesty matters more than gym bro certainty. Training to failure does stimulate growth, but it is not dramatically better than training close to failure. And for most lifters, most of the time, it simply isn't necessary. The research on this has gotten a lot more precise over the past several years. Large meta-analyses pooling dozens of studies have found that muscle growth is broadly similar whether sets are taken to absolute failure or stopped a few reps short, as long as total training volume is roughly matched. There's a slight trend toward more growth as you get closer to failure, but the difference between 1 to 2 reps in reserve and true failure is small enough that it rarely matters in the real world, especially once you factor in the extra fatigue that failure training creates. So the honest takeaway is this: proximity to failure matters for muscle growth. But actual failure is not some magic switch that unlocks extra gains. Getting close is what does the real work. Let's talk about why training close to failure works, because understanding the mechanism helps you apply it correctly. It comes down to something called motor unit recruitment. Your body doesn't activate every muscle fiber from the first rep of a set. The early reps are handled mostly by smaller, lower threshold motor units. As those fibers fatigue across the set, your nervous system recruits progressively larger, higher threshold motor units, the ones most responsible for size and strength, to keep the weight moving. This recruitment ramps up sharply in the last few reps of a hard set. And that's exactly why those final reps, whether or not you actually hit failure, deliver the bulk of the growth stimulus. This is also why very light, easy sets don't build much muscle no matter how many reps you crank out. Without enough fatigue building up inside the set, you never recruit those high threshold fibers in the first place. Now, strength training is a different story. While both muscle growth and strength benefit from lifting close to failure, training all the way to failure matters less and can even work against you when raw strength is the goal. Strength is partly a skill, dependent on neural efficiency and technique under heavy load, not just muscle size. Grinding heavy sets to true failure piles up enormous nervous system fatigue, which can blunt your performance on later sets and later sessions. Several studies on strength, athletes have found that stopping to 2-4 reps short of failure produces equal or better strength gains than training to failure, largely because lifters can accumulate more quality volume without burning out. So if your main goal is a bigger squat, bench, or deadlift, save true failure for accessory work and rare test days, not your heavy compound sets week after week. Let's talk about the downsides, because this is where failure training quietly costs you. The biggest cost is an injury, though that matters too. It's fatigue accumulation that eats into your ability to do quality work later in the same session and across the entire week. Each set taken to true failure generates disproportionately more fatigue than a set stopped a couple reps short, both in the working muscle and systemically through your nervous system. And that fatigue doesn't just vanish when the set ends. It carries into your next exercise, reducing the weight and reps you can handle, and it carries into your next session, sometimes forcing extra recovery days that cut into your weekly training. There's also a real injury consideration. As fatigue climbs toward true failure, form control degrades, bar path drifts, and joints end up absorbing forces they weren't designed to handle. On a machine or an isolation exercise, that's a minor issue. On a heavy barbell squat or deadlift, a form breakdown on the last rep of a failure set is exactly the kind of moment that causes real injuries. So which exercises are actually safe to take to failure? This is the key to using it smartly. The lower risk, great candidates are machine and cable exercises. Lot pull downs, cable rows, leg curls, chest press machines, and cable curls. The fixed or guided path means a failed rep just stops the weight, not your body. Isolation moves like bicep curls, tricep pushdowns, and lateral raises are similarly safe. There's no heavy bar to lose control of. The higher risk exercises are heavy barbell squats, deadlifts, and overhead presses. A failed rep under a heavy bar can mean a dangerous loss of position. So these are the lifts where stopping to 2-3 reps short is the smarter default. Bench press sits in between. With a spotter or safety bar set correctly, taking it to failure is reasonably safe. Without one, it's genuinely not worth the risk. Now, how close to failure do you actually need to get? It depends on your rep range. For moderate reps, roughly 6 to 15%, stopping 1 to 3 reps short captures nearly all the benefit while keeping fatigue manageable. This is your bread and butter for most of your training. For higher reps, above 15 to 20, you need to get much closer to failure, often 0 to 1 rep in reserve, because at very light loads, the early reps barely tax the muscle at all. And for lower rep, heavier strength work, 1 to 5 reps, staying 2 to 4 reps short is usually the smarter call. Experience matters too. Beginners tend to underestimate how close to failure they really are, often stopping with more reps left than they think. Advanced lifters usually have very accurate rep in reserve estimation and can train more precisely near their limits when a program calls for it. Speaking of beginners, should they train to failure? Generally, no. Beginners build muscle extremely well from moderate effort, often to 2-4 reps in reserve, simply because almost any consistent, progressive stimulus is new and effective to an untrained body. Pushing a beginner to true failure, especially on compound barbell lifts, adds risk without adding meaningful benefit. Technique is still developing, and the ability to stay safe under extreme fatigue just isn't there yet. Build a technical foundation first, then introduce failure training gradually and selectively once your form is second nature. Let's quickly cover beyond failure techniques like drop sets and rest pause. Drop sets, where you hit failure, immediately drop the weight, and keep going, can add extra volume in less time. Rest pause works similarly, hitting failure, resting 15 to 20 seconds, then squeezing out a few more reps. These work, but they come with the same trade-off as regular failure training, just amplified. A big fatigue costs for a relatively modest extra benefit. Use them as an occasional finisher on the last set of an isolation exercise, not the foundation of your whole program. And one exercise per muscle group per session is plenty. So here's how to program failure intelligently. On your main compound lifts, stay 2 to 3 reps short of failure on most working sets. On secondary compounds, 1 to 2 reps in reserve is a reasonable default. And on isolation and machine work, the safest category, take your final set to true failure or even one drop set beyond it for a low-risk extra stimulus. That structure gives you most of the benefit failure training offers while protecting the total training volume that actually drives long-term progress. One more thing. Watch for signs you're overdoing it. If your usual weights suddenly feel much heavier, your soreness lingers for days longer than normal, your sleep drops off, or your motivation tanks, those are classic signs of fatigue outrunning recovery. Back off failure training for a week or two and consider a planned deload every 6 to 8 weeks to stay ahead of it. So let's bring it home. Training to failure can build muscle, but it is not the requirement gym culture makes it out to be. Research consistently shows that stopping a rep or two short delivers nearly identical growth with meaningfully less fatigue and risk. Save true failure for safer isolation and machine exercises where a missed rep costs you nothing but a little burn. Keep 2 to 3 reps in reserve on your heavy compound lifts. And let consistent, progressive volume do the heavy lifting your training actually depends on. The full written breakdown, with all the rep and reserve targets and a sample weekly structure, is linked down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.